everybody. This is Shannon Sparks from Avalara. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar, Improving Your Exemption Management Process. We have a great presentation lined up for you. I'm excited to welcome our presenter, Wendy Leonard. Wendy is one of our amazing sales engineers here at Avalara. With 20 years of experience in the industry, she's an expert in the exemption certificate process. Wendy will speak about how error-prone this process can be and how Avalara can improve your document compliance. She'll also conduct a product demonstration of CertCapture. Just a couple of brief housekeeping items before I hand the mic to Wendy. Today's presentation will be about 30 minutes, followed by a question and answer period. Your lines are muted, but please use the question and answer box located on the right-hand side of your screen to ask questions at any time during the presentation. Wendy's an expert on this topic, so don't be shy and ask away. Lastly, our session will be recorded and sent to you in a follow-up email in case you'd like to revisit or share the content with colleagues. With that, I'll give the floor to Wendy.
Super, thank you. So thanks, guys, for joining us. Some people might not think talking about exemption certificates is all that interesting. I think it's fascinating, and I'm glad you've joined us to talk through it. So we just want to go over really kind of where we are in the sales tax industry and how certificates, kind of dovetail into the other things going on, and then how certificates management is document management, and then the whole larger solution. And we're going to, as she just said, we're going to look a little bit at CertCapture directly and have any questions that you've got from there. So the larger piece of it is around what's going on in sales tax in general. So there's certainly lots of changes going on inside of the sales tax ecosystem, right? So first and foremost, and this has been the case for many years, we keep repeating it and it bears repeating, is that this is a big source of money for the states. So sales tax for the states that charge sales tax, which is most of them, continues to be a super important revenue source for them. And anything that deteriorates that revenue source is frustrating, and further, and like e-commerce and things like that, that there's more and more sales that are going through that aren't necessarily getting taxed on them properly. So a lot of the states are trying to figure out how to capture that. An exemption certificate falls right in there of limiting some types of exemptions, being a little bit more picky on definitions, but the primary thing is actually enforcing rules that are on the book. So many times I'll talk with a company that's been audited years ago, and they said, the auditor didn't even care about my exemptions, like what else was, I sell in, 2-ton quantities, there's no end consumer using that. Clearly they're reselling it. And it wasn't so significant, many years ago. But now the auditors are saying that it's not just the spirit of the law, right? It's really the letter of the law. Do you have the documentation that the Department of Revenue, the legislation requires? So it really is important that this is big money for the states, and that every way they can capitalize and get the money coming in the door without adding new regulations, or maybe adding a few regulations they can get away with, is really important to them. And there's a lot of complexity around it because everything with sales tax is dots. It depends on the state. So all of the rules, all of the regulations, all of the exemptions, what states have what types of exemptions in place. So this is just part of your larger sales tax responsibility, which is getting more and more complex as time is going on, if your company is staying the same. But often your company doesn't stay the same. You yourself, as a taxpayer, your dynamics are changing. If you have any mergers and acquisitions going on, that can definitely change your sales tax scenario and your certificate scenario. If you've got new channels, so e-commerce is often a different dynamic and maybe even different customers than traditional ERP sales, and how does that impact your exemptions and your customers and things like that? And if you are doing B2B through e-commerce, do they get to take advantage of the existing certificate they gave you that your e-commerce knows that they're exempt? So just dynamics of changing how you're doing business, even if the larger piece of sales tax and exemption issues weren't changing, adds a lot of complexity to what's going on. And then certainly if you got audits that are auditors coming knocking on your door, then making sure that you're able to identify transactions from these different sources, what documents, what you were relying on, all that larger piece of it makes for really a headache and makes for a lot of complexity because there are moving pieces on lots of different fronts. And specifically around exemption certificates, there's some pretty consistent challenges. So certificate requests, it's funny, it shouldn't seem that difficult to get an exemption certificate from your customer. They are the ones that are saying, hey, you shouldn't charge me tax. You would think that they would understand they have to provide you some documents to go with it. But lo and behold, that is not really the case. After a couple decades of doing this, customers feel generally entitled to that exemption and wish you would read their mind, much less have to give you documents, much less timely documents, accurate documents, those sorts of things. So that certificate request and collection effort can be really a customer service angle, but can also be somewhat of an effort, right? So there's the taxability piece of it, what states allow what types of things, because there's lots of variations. There's making sure we're getting the document from your customer in a timely and efficient manner. They're making sure that once you've got it, you've stored it properly so you can find it again later when you're looking for it for a billing question or for an audit or for renewals or whatever that might look like. And then we've got to make sure that that's tying in to something that's actually billing your customer, because a certificate in the wild cannot survive. There's no point of having this beautiful database of exemption certificates if you're not using it to accurately tie into your billing so that you're effectively only exempting customers you have certificates, and customers you have certificates, you're definitely exempting them, because that's a very frustrating customer service experience when they provided a certificate and you still add tax onto it. They don't so much care if they haven't provided it and you're exempting them. That's just a liability issue for you. But it goes both ways, and we need to tie it in as much as possible so there's not that human error of identifying it. And then once you've done all that, you've got to renew it. It starts all over again for certificates that expire, and the challenge of knowing which ones expire and when. But even when you're able to do that process, you've still got to request a certificate, collect it, store it, update your ERP, all those different things. So there's a lot of challenges that are sort of in a, lather, rinse, repeat cycle that are going throughout the process. And really, that's what CertCapture is designed to do as far as the integration process. So Avatax is a tax calculation engine that Avalara has, and that's making that tax determination, and that includes customers that are exempt and customers that aren't exempt, right? So it's sending through all the key pieces of information to decide for that transaction dynamically what's the tax that's applied here. Now, it might include no tax that's applied here because you have an exemption certificate that's on file and tied into your Avatax system. But we're still capturing that within Avatax for your non-taxable sales, of course, because all of that information is due when you're reporting that to the jurisdictions. So it all is really tied into a cycle. So we've got our taxable sales, our non-taxable sales, all dynamically checking to see what documentation you have on file, and you have to be able to verify all of those details in the returns that you're providing, as well as if you get audited on it as well. So this is kind of the larger solution suite within Avalara. So when we talk about CertCapture, again, specifically, there's some key goals to really offset those different risks that many people have that kind of are the repeating things that come up over and over. So the first and foremost is, of course, risk. We want to mitigate that. And I just can't stress enough how much, and I think many companies don't appreciate, many do, but many don't, that managing your exemption certificates is a customer service activity. It's also tax, right? But it's handled by non-tax professionals, your customers, and you're typically your frontline employees. And so the risk of deteriorating that customer service to get your document and then doing all of that and not even having a valid document and the end of it, you're better off just saying, yes, customer, of course you're exempt, and then paying the tax yourself. Because if you get caught in an audit, you're going to pay the tax anyways and some penalties for it. So if we're going to go through this effort, we want to make sure first and foremost that we're actually mitigating the risk, that we have the documents, they're accurate, and we can find them later. And then the second thing is, like, having accurate documents is awesome. We don't want to lose customers in the process, and we really don't want to have to hire extra headcount to be better at this. So we want to make sure that it's efficient, that if possible, we're actually reducing the things that can be labor intensive, credit and rebills and short pays and all those sorts of things if you're not managing your certificates as effectively as you could. And then third, of course, we want to make, as part of making this efficient and reducing your risk around that, is making sure that it's integrated, so that tying into your billing system, tying into Avatax, all those different pieces. So we are going to take a look at CertCapture, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this is CertCapture. We've kind of mentioned these various different components in the little circle, right? We talked about the life cycle. So the life cycle is new customer comes on board. Hey, customer, are you exempt? Are you taxable? If they're exempt, so we've got our customers. If they're exempt, then hey, great, I need to get that exemption certificate or many certificates from you if you're shipping into multiple states to that customer. So if they've got a document that they can provide to you, they just send that right over. So the CertCapture system comes with a dedicated email address, a dedicated fax, and you can always upload documents so if they've mailed it in or submitted it as a part of a credit app process. If they don't have it right then and there, or if they're kind of like, yeah, I have this document, I'm not quite sure if it's the right thing, you can always send them communication. You can send them a single request or a bulk request, which is just multiple requests at once, a campaign. So you can send them a request from the system and let them know how they can provide a certificate for you, or if they're not sure, how they can help build an accurate certificate. So that's built into the system also in that cycle. And then once we've received it, it's going to go in and give you a tool to do the data entry piece of it and validate it and see, is this a good document? If it's not a good document, we can identify any invalids and the reasons that they're invalid. And then that last piece of it is, it's stored, it's easily accessible, and then we can start all over with renewals, which would be the campaigns and things like that. And to do all of that life cycle, there's three main things that the system facilitates. So one main thing is document management. First and foremost, we've got to figure out what we have on file, be able to export the images, export the data, being able to manage all of that in a very efficient process. So for instance, we can see here just on the main dashboard, we've got these new certificates that have come into the system recently. We've got some that have been invalid. Do we know the reason why? Do we know, are we able to queue up communication going back to them? We can see we also have some certificates that are going to expire soon. And we've got a separate certificate that already has expired. So we've reached out to our customer and they just haven't replaced it. Now, it could be that the customer no longer is in business or doesn't do business with you, but we'd like to identify, why. And because as soon as a certificate expires, if you tied it into your Avatax account, you're going to start charging them. So it's important to be proactive when it's in the expiring stage that you've reached out to your customer. And there's tools in the system to allow you to do all those different pieces and understand the dynamics of it. So that's one, is that all of that document management piece, extensive searching and all of that sort of thing, and exporting and communication. So the second big piece that the system does is the content. So just like Avatax, if you're using our Avatax service, where it is controlling all of the rules and rates and boundaries and things like that, when you're dealing with exemption certificates, you've got a lot of those same issues. So all of the various different exemption types across the top and various states, and where they intersect is where the allowable exemptions are. Now, it might not make sense that every one of our clients, right, would accept every type of exemption out there. So if something doesn't apply to you, if what you sell just doesn't make sense that you would receive prime contractor exemption certificates, for instance, you could just come in and turn it off. So basically, configure the system to work with your tax profile and the larger, certificate ecosystem, like your tax profile. So you're removing all the white noise so that your folks, your employees, your customers only need to deal with what makes sense for your situation. And then within that, you'll see that there's different types. With the different types of exemptions, often there's going to be different forms that are required. for a resale exemption versus a religious exemption versus a prime contractor exemption. So we're keeping track of the different types of forms that can document the different things, which types of exemptions are valid within any given state. You'll see, for instance, California for a state exemption, that is not an allowable exemption type. California charges their state and local government just like they were you and me. There's not an exemption type for that, and the system's going to keep track of it. It's most common that most states do have that, but certainly not all of them do. You'll see Arkansas and Arizona are in the same category with California on that. So you won't have to do that heavy lifting to keep track of those different rules and regulations. And then further, you're able to identify what those different expirations are, which can be tricky. And they do change often based on the exemption reason. So in Colorado, resale certificates expire, but research and development religious certificates don't expire. So there's different rules based on state and based on reason, and we're keeping track of those rules for you as well. Now you can, again, configure this for what makes sense in your worldview, right, for your tax profile, for your customers. So California, for instance, for resale, doesn't have a statutory exemption, meaning there is nothing in the rules that say you must replace all of your certificates every X years. But many of my customers will put a proactive expiration in place because California in particular is very picky about what I refer to as event-based expirations. So their regulation says something along the lines of you may accept a certificate as blanket, meaning it's valid for multiple transactions as long as the certificate is completed in full, the certificate was received timely, and all of the information remains the same. So that all of the information remains the same piece of it speaks to if your customer name changes, technically if your customer's address changes, your name, your address changes, the type of property they're purchasing from you, all of those things have been used in many cases by auditors to say, oh, this certificate you have from your customer expired at the point that X change was made in your or their information. And all of these transactions after that change don't get covered under that certificate. And so many of my clients will feel uncomfortable having an unending exemption certificate from their customers because they don't know magically when information changes. So it's just the best practice to update every few years, every 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever makes sense in your profile, to replace those certificates proactively so that you're not left holding the bag with a certificate that an auditor questions for a period of time. So you can do all of that configuration again. So what makes sense in your tax profile with your audit experience with your types of customers and apply that over the top of the core statutory requirements around that as well. Okay, so that's a key component of CertCapture. So we've got all of the document management piece of it and being efficient as far as knowing what we have and being ready for things and running reports, knowing that we've got the tax content in there. And then the third piece of managing exemptions, and that, again, is your customers. And they are the wild card, right? They just don't really care for this process. And I haven't really figured out why, but customers a little bit resent having to provide this information from you. They don't get why, but by and large, they do. And so that's why the system has tools in here to help you communicate with your customer. And that's a big reason why we keep track of so much information from a document management point of view of when you've reached out to your customer, what your customer has provided to you, when, the quality of it, so that the customer doesn't get nearly so frustrated with these various different scenarios. So let's just walk through the one that's pretty common. So I'm just going to run a standard search, and there's just lots of ways to slice and dice your data and run a very specific filtered search. I'm just running a wide open one and pulling up. And in general, when we're looking at the results for CertCapture, green is good and red is bad. So in this particular scenario for Emory Tool, I've got a multi-jurisdictional on file, lots of different states, but the certificate they provided me for Florida is not a valid document. It's easy for me to tell that I should not be exempting Florida, but these other states, I'm good to go, and Avatax, if it was connected into my CertCapture account, would be exempting them. So you can just kind of scroll down and see your different status and pull up any corresponding images if you'd like to about what's going on with these, right? So in this case, for this Florida one, I don't even have a document. It's missing. My Louisiana one's invalid and the other ones were good. And so what sometimes happens is your customer has provided you a couple exemption certificates. Let's look at this first one, but not everything that they need to have. So they've started shipping to a new location and they haven't provided you any documentation. So maybe a customer calls in to customer support or accounting and says, hey, you guys messed up and my last invoice you charged me tax, you never charged me tax, that was a mistake. So someone on your team is easily able to come in and say, oh, well, I see that's because you normally ship to California and Idaho and occasionally these other states. But this last invoice was a shipment to New York. I don't have a certificate for you from New York. So what happens a lot of times is customers just think, oh, well, you lost it. No, in fact, you haven't provided all of the things that are necessary. And there's a full history here that lets you know what's been provided and all that sort of thing. In this case, you can say, well, I need to just get that New York certificate. Let me quickly send you correspondence so you know how to provide it to me. And there's a bunch of preset cover letters and templates that you can select among. Maybe you even have, if you have a lot of short pays or credit rebills or something like that, you can have a special letter that's specifically designed for a short pay. So maybe, you've received an invoice that's a check that it's short paid for the exact amount of sales tax, right? Well, they obviously think they have a certificate, and you can pick a specific cover letter. Maybe you want to customize it just to that. So this is a more generic one because in this case, I'm just missing an exemption certificate. So I'm going to pick the standard missing a certificate template. And you can see exactly what that template's going to look like. This would be your logo that you'd merge in. Anything in brackets gets merged in. Anything else is hard, coded in your communication. And you can have a custom little message here. So maybe they just called in. Nice to speak to you. Here's the email we just discussed. And the system knows that there's probably no reason to communicate about these other states because they're good to go. You probably just want to talk about New York in this communication. So it queues that up. And it knows that for New York, for resale, it's going to be a 120. If I was doing this for New York and a government, then it's going to change to the right form. Using that template that we've looked at, it knows the requirements based on the reason and the state. And it's queuing that piece of it up. And again, if I wanted to say, and you can fax it here, and you can email it here, or you can mail it here, they could return it in those different methods. I also included a partially completed certificate. If I had wanted to only send this cover letter, I would just say, cover letter only, and that's just going to be this option. And you'll see that there's a link in here because the system also comes with a dedicated portal for you as a seller to have your customers go out and submit exemption certificates. And we'll quickly look at what that experience for your customer might look like. So I'm going back to the customer record here in CertCapture, and I can see that it's keeping track of everything that's happening. So we can see that it's kept track of any different activity that we've done in the past, and right now it's saying that, hey, on this date and time stamp, this particular user, that's me, sent a request, and it was specifically regarding New York. You sent it to this customer's email address, and here's a physical copy of what was sent. So we can review that. Make that smaller so people can see. Maybe not that small. Okay, so here's exactly what was sent to the customer. And you'll see that I had that partially completed exemption certificate. And New York resale certificates can be a little tricky for customers to complete. You'll see they have to say singular blanket. They've got, these are kind of goofy questions, engaged in the business and in principally resell. Those are almost always the same answer, but they ask it twice. And then there's this whole part 1, if you're registered in New York, part 2, if you're not, and then these items at the bottom. So this can be a very challenging certificate for customers to submit completely, right? They often just sign the bottom and they're like, yep, I'm good to go. And in fact, they forgot the key thing, which is they have to provide their ID number here, right? So you could end up with, if even providing the document, you could end up with not valid certificates in return, depending on the sophistication of your customer. Or if you didn't know the reason, or if you don't know the state, or if you don't necessarily trust your customer, that's where you can use this online portal to have your customers go out. It's a self-help tool. They would get in the email. They get this link that sends them out here, and they would be able to complete the certificate. Okay? And so you can see lumber and stuff. That's the name of my demo site, so that would be equivalent to you as a seller. New customer 1, that's the name of my customer that I just sent the request to, so they know they're in the right place. And then here's a list of the existing certificates that they've provided to me. I can see they're all right there, and we can see that I'm looking for a New York certificate. If they're like, oh, well, you know what, I'm also going to be shipping to Colorado or wherever that might be, they can always add an additional state. So let's go ahead and complete the New York process. So what, again, this is self-help that your customer would be doing this process on their own. So New York, exactly what's the reason for the exemption that you'll have? And here's where all of these reasons, remember we mentioned it might not be appropriate for you to have prime contractor exemptions from your customer base. We might have turned that off in this matrix. Had I turned that off, that configuration directly controls what your customers see here. So this drop-down list will only be as you've configured it and for what is appropriate. So we'll pick resale. And next. And this is identifying exactly what the Department of Revenue is looking for. And remember, this SC-120 has these various different pieces, and so that is what, the various things that people have that they need to be completing, right? That sometimes can be challenging for them. So we want to make this as easy as possible, right? We want to make sure that we're only asking what absolutely has to be, but everything that has to be, because that in order to be accepted thing has to be fully completed. So the system is ensuring that based on the reason that they're providing, they don't have to know the form. We're going to provide a valid form that the Department of Revenue accepts for that reason, and we're going to ensure that all of the required fields are populated. I can't move on unless they've given me the required information. So engaged in the business of selling hardware and maybe in lumber based on my pretend company, and they principally, say resale, hardware and lumber, and hardware and lumber. Okay, and then here's that question, are you registered in New York or not? So yes, and this boils down to that Part 1 and Part 2. So there's no need to present them the Part 2 portions if you're not registered based on this. So it's trying to keep it as simple as possible, because again, your customers aren't experts in this, and they don't know what's required, and they don't have a huge tolerance for it. So now it wants to know tangible personal property or services. It's going to be tangible personal property and buying stuff. And now customer has completed all of the required fields for an SC-120 for New York, so that they're going to have a fully completed exemption certificate. And then they'll put their name in and their title. And I'm going to go ahead and sign that and move on. So this is a mobile optimized experience. So if your customer had received that email from you on their iPhone or their Android phone or on a tablet of some kind, they can launch in and complete this process. And instead of signing with my mouse, they would sign, with their finger like the kids these days do. And once I've submitted that, it's actually being sent into the back end. So these are all their documents they've submitted previously. They could download copies if they were interested. They could, pull up any of those versions that they'd like to. And they also now have just submitted that New York certificate to you. So this is the finalized form that they just completed, and it's available in the back end of CertCapture. So now we're able to come in and see in my pending, because I've just received it, I haven't approved it yet, I've now got this new New York certificate for what was just completed today. And then I can come in and do that validation. And there's one queue for all incoming certificates, whether they're faxing them, emailing them, mailing to you, and you're uploading them here, whether they're complete, sending in the partially completed ones you forwarded to them, or whether they're just going to the online portal for Cert Express. All of them come to the same queue. So you've got an efficient process. You can control the people that are reviewing them. You can control kind of a first in, first out, so they're all in order. All of those different pieces, you've now got control and a process around. And here's the New York certificate that was just completed. If you'd like to have an email that's sent to your users as new certificates come into the system, you can turn on those emails. Or if you're getting them all the time and you're like, yeah, I know, quit emailing me, I know I'm getting these certificates, you just turn that option off. So you can control, each user can control what they want that experience to be. Now, this certificate was just completed online, so we knew all the information. So there's very, very little to do at this point. We knew which customer it was associated to. We know which state. We know which reason, which date. The system calculated based on that matrix what the expiration is. I can go ahead and just review it. Yep. It looks good. I know that it was completed online. I can see that it's the barcode, and I can see that it's got the ID number that online created. So I know all the required fields have been populated. I just want to read them and make sure that it makes sense, right? Because my demo site seller is a hardware store, and it wouldn't make sense if somebody said that they were buying hair care products for resale, right? Because I don't sell that. They probably just don't want to pay tax on it. So I would still review this and confirm it makes sense, and then validate that. So now I've processed that certificate. As I approve the certificate, it immediately becomes available inside of Avatax if I've hooked my systems together, so that if there's a sale coming in from my ERP, that's able to be exempted. Now, not all documents, of course, have to come through that online portal. You can have documents, again, that get faxed in, that get uploaded in, all of those different versions, and you can process each of those pretty efficiently. No one's going to work on top of each other, because as I've opened this document, I've claimed it to myself, so we don't have to worry about being efficient on the back end. The system's controlling that piece of it as well. So this is just something that customer emailed to me, and I've loaded into the system. Just those things that were pre-populated when customer did it in the online experience. I just need to do those 4 key fields here manually. And you know, one, pretend there's a document there. You can always enlarge it if you want to read something, but pretend it says real information. So you'd read the customer, and you would look it up. And I think I had a customer Emory Tool, and we're going to read it, and we're going to say, all right, this is a resale certificate. It is for California. If it was a multi-jurisdictional and it also was for Alabama, I could include that as well. It pre-populates. It guesses maybe today was the date that that the customer signed it. Well, actually, they signed it last week, and it pre-populates again, knows the expiration. Now, if I'd put something proactive in place for California, it would have put that couple of years in there. And so those are the key things. We need to know which customer it is. We need to know which state it's for. We need to know the reason and the date. The date's going to populate then the expiration. And now I can validate that document. Or if it's not valid, I have a reason that I can identify why. So this is kind of greatest hits about what customers can do wrong on certificates. Now, they're crafty. They can do anything wrong. There's another. But typically, they haven't signed it or dated. They didn't put their ID number. They didn't say which state it was really for, the description. Those are all kind of the key things. And of course, as with many things, this is configurable. It comes with a default list of items, but you could tweak them, you could remove them, you could add your own that makes sense in your environment. Okay, so various different ways to get certificates in the system, kind of meet your customer where they already are. If they say, no, you're going to take exactly what I have, and give me feedback on it, then just say, great, here's my email, here's my fax, mail it to me, and you'll upload it in. If they're not sure what documents they should be providing to you, send them out to the online Cert Express and have them create them on the fly. So really it just depends on how you want to use the system with where your customers come to you with what they have and the quality of what they tend to be sending to you. That's a really brief overview of the full system. Just know that there's all of the document management, the widgets here, these are all, you can configure them by person. So some people might care more about new certificates that are coming in the system. Others might care more about those that are expiring. So you can add some or remove some. There's a widget, there's this insights option that pulls up your overall statistics. So it's going to give you the overall, more of the strategic view of everything that's in your certificate pool. So of all the certificates you have, what's the different status of them? These are valid, but you've got a fair chunk that's not valid, that's missing or invalid. It gives you trending on any new certificates, any modified certificates, the various different types of exemptions you have. So you've got reporting that comes in the system prepackaged that you can have, as much as you like, run these to let you know the overall quality of your certificates, again, on that kind of strategic level, as opposed to the dashboard when you log right in. That's more of a tactical level of what needs to happen today, my new, my invalid, my needing to be expired, and things like that. So there's extensive reporting. Things can be emailed to you. You can consume them in lots of different ways. That's really my overview. Around that, any questions that you guys have, by all means, let us know, and we're going to cover that. We're going to have questions and answers here in just a second. All right, so just to recap, CertCapture, we've got various different pieces, right? We want to be able to make it so that customers can interact with you in a way that they are comfortable with interacting. So there's lots of different ways for them to get documents to you and for your ERP to tie into Avatax. And the key is that, again, CertCapture and Avatax are speaking to each other so that you're able to, as soon as you get that valid certificate, Avatax is aware of it. So you can hopefully try to limit as much as possible those credit and rebills and short pays and things like that by putting a more proactive process in place that automatically speaks to the billing process instead of many people tend to have very reactive processes in corresponding and dealing with their customers around certificates. And then really it can very much kind of change the dynamics within your company, certainly in audits, of course, you're far more capable of preparing for audits, finding out your situation ahead of time, hopefully getting any missing certificates in the time period from when an auditor says they're coming to when they actually show up. But if the system's been in place for a while, typically those activities are very minimal because you kind of built it all as you've gone, again, more proactively. So there's far more visibility into what your situation is, good or bad, as well as all of the tools to help you have a better situation going forward so that panic activity around an audit or a potential audit or even internal audits, sometimes internal audits to see your overall situation or prepare annual reserves or anything like that. Sometimes those can be far more painful than actual state audits, and the same tools that are available for the state auditor and complying with all those rules and regulations would be your own internal, or if you have to comply with any SOX rules and regulations as far as all of that compliance piece of it, which does largely tend to be a document management effort, becomes far, far easier and more manageable from there as well. All right, so do we have any questions that if people have entered in?
Hi, Wendy. Like you mentioned, we're going to go ahead and open up the floor to any questions you may have. Just as a reminder for everyone on the call, you can go ahead and use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen to type in any questions you might have. And if we don't get to your question today, please know that we will be circling back with you individually so you can get those answers that you need. So with that, let's take a peek. Wendy, we do have some questions. Our first question is, how many exemption certificates should I have before I consider automating this process?
Oh, that's a great question. As with everything having to do with sales tax, the answer is DOS. It depends. Well, it depends on the state, all that sort of thing. So it really depends on complexity that you've got. So it could be that that you have lots of different exemption types. Maybe you don't have that much volume of incoming certificates, but the range of types of exemptions that you might get from your customers can be wide. So you could be getting resale and you could be getting nonprofits and maybe agricultural and manufacturing and those types of things. And that's a wide range of different types. And across a few different states, that's a whole lot of information to try and keep track and work and correspond with your customers. So in that case, your certificate volume could be somewhat low, but the complexity of it becomes too much and too overwhelming. Or you could maybe just have resale exemptions, but you've got many, many different states that you're working across. And so keeping track of the different rules and regulations and the expirations across those different states could be overwhelming. Or it could be that you are in just 2 states and maybe even just resale, but boy, oh boy, do you have a lot of volume that's coming through. And in that case, it's a straight, hey, about, this number, would make sense. But in addition to that complexity, it really matters your internal processes. So what do you have today that you've got to, what's your opportunity cost, right? What are the other options that you have to manage this process? So if you have a very poor document management system or tying in, then it might not even take much for you to be thrown over the edge on that. Or if you you have no employees, no FTEs that have in any way dedicated this process in their job responsibilities, then you probably need help automating, whether you've got a high volume or not, because you've got no other way to particularly manage it and mitigate that risk. So it really is a combination of multiple factors of what makes sense in your environment to be too many for you. In general, all other things being equal, by the time you get over, I don't know, maybe 500 certificates, if there's no actual complexity to it, it's just really dealing with 500 certificates, depending on how often they're coming in, people start looking for a more automated system to help them with that.
Thanks, Wendy. Another question for you. Do all states accept the digitally signed certificates?
They do. Actually, the practice kind of paved the way for that. And now we've got the DocuSign and all those sorts of things. So back in the day, they kind of removed the obligation of having, quote unquote, an original, because nobody could identify what original meant anymore with technology. And then the credit cards, when you're signing with a little pen at the grocery store and things like that, by all means, those are real signatures that bind you to those transactions. So that is something that the states are all on board with these days. It is considered what's called a wet signature, so it's not like an electronic signature. It's actually a signature that's just applied in a digital manner. So the states do not have issue with it. For the states that allow, types of certificates. So just as a caveat, so for instance, Florida, the annual resale certificates at DR13, there is no signature component on there, right? And so they're not requiring that. You have to actually get a copy of their document. So different states have different requirements, and CertCapture, the matrix, again, is going to help you know what those requirements are. And if you're sending customers out to the online Cert Express, then that's going to control whether they're asking them to sign a document or whether it's saying, here's what you're looking for in your records. You need to provide this document. Here are your methods to send that document in. So all of those different pieces and those variations are controlled within the system.
Thanks, Wendy. A follow-up question to that. Does Avalara CertCapture verify the account numbers that are linked to the uploaded certificates, or will these need to be manually checked before validating?
That is a great question. I'm going to bounce over and just show you what that looks like real quick. So when you've got a document that is in the validation queue in here, as you're in here and you see, if you're going to type in the tax ID number, you're able to see that as I click in here, it provides the Texas format. So Texas numbers are always 11 digits. And I can verify what that might be based on what the certificate is, and pretend I've got Texas in here. It's a California certificate, but you pretend that that's accurate. And you can see there's an online link that you can go out to verify for the states that have them. So that about half of the states these days do have an online verification that you can go out and verify directly. And you can see that for the states that have them, Alabama does not have an online tool that you can verify tax ID numbers, but we do have standard published formats that these certificate numbers could be in, so it provides that. California has an online link, and we've provided the format. Illinois has an online link, and we've provided the format. Texas that we saw, that type of thing. So it does include those tools that are in there for the states that have an online verification. It'll link right to that, and you can verify that if that's part of your process and due diligence that you're doing as a seller. Okay. Is there another follow-up question?
Thanks, Wendy. I think those are all the questions we have for the moment. I just want to remind everyone, if you do have a question that you think of after, please go ahead and contact your account manager or Avalara contact, or go ahead and input that into the question box, and I'll collect those to get answers for you. So before we wrap up, I'd like to share a couple next steps. If you're already an Avalara customer, maybe you own AvaTax or returns, and are interested in managing your exemption certificate process with CertCapture, please go ahead and reach out to your account manager or email us at customer.loyalty@avalara.com. If you happen to already own CertCapture and just want to utilize the tools better, we have some great Avalara University classes for you, and these can be viewed at training.avalara.com. And if you're not an Avalara customer and you're looking to learn more about Avalara and how to better manage your tax documents, please reach out to our Exemption Certificate Specialist, Monica Jones, and she can be reached at monica.jones@avalara.com or the phone number there on your screens. So with that, Wendy, any final thoughts before we close?
Nope, just again want to thank folks for joining us. It's hard to carve out some time, and I appreciate your spending it with us to talk about exemption certificates.
All right. Thanks, Wendy, and thanks, everyone, for joining us. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.